and welcome to another daily devotional this morning. Over the past number of days, we've been thinking about Paul, who was describing people in the congregation in Philippi as being enemies of the cross of Christ. And Paul was painting a picture of these people in order to encourage the other Christians in Philippi not to be like them. In other words, he was saying, look, here's an example that you're not to follow. Having done that, Paul then goes on to give the Philippians an example that they ought to follow. And the example is himself. Listen to what he says. He says, "Join with others in following my example, brothers, and take note of those who live according to the pattern we gave you." So Paul is saying they are to take note of those who are truly walking in a godly way, and that he himself is a good example to follow. Now, we're not to think that Paul is somehow arrogantly putting himself on a pedestal here. He's not saying, look, I'm such a wonderful Christian that you should all try and be like me. We have to remember that Paul called himself the chief of sinners. He's already told the Philippians that he has not yet attained to what he wants. He's not yet perfect. But as an old commentator points out in his commentary on Philippians, he says Christian humility does not imply blindness to what the Spirit of God has wrought in our character. And the Apostle Paul knew that God had worked a wonderful change in his life and character. He could say with John Newton, "I have ever to confess with sorrow that I am far from being what I ought to be, and far from what I wish to be, but, blessed be God, I am far, very far from what I once was." And the Apostle Paul was very far from what he once was. He was a changed man. And it was in this spirit of humble recognition of his own shortcomings on the one hand, coupled with the confident assurance that God was increasingly shaping and moulding him into the likeness of Christ, that Paul was able to encourage the Philippians to follow his example. And what an example it was. He was an example to the Philippians in respect of prayer, for example. From the moment Paul was converted, prayer was an important aspect of this man's life. You remember when God spoke to Ananias, telling him to go to Straight Street, and he would find Paul in one of the houses there in Straight Street. He said to Ananias, "Behold, he is praying." Right from the very beginning. Whenever he was locked in prison in Philippi with Silas, we read at midnight they were praying. Whenever he met the elders from Ephesus on the beach at Miletus, we read that he spent time with them in prayer. If you read his letters to the churches in Rome and Corinth and Ephesus and Philippi and Colossae and Thessalonica, you can't help but see that this is a man of prayer. He talks about praying regularly for the people in these churches. So as the Philippians look at Paul, one of the things they certainly see is here is a man of prayer, and Paul is encouraging to follow my example. Follow my example when it comes to prayer. And folks, isn't that something that should be true of us? That you and I should be men and women of prayer. Prayer is so important and so essential for the spiritual good of our own lives and for the spiritual good of the congregations of which we form a part. People who are Christians should be people of prayer. It's so important to set aside time every single day, and I would encourage you to do so in the mornings. Take time before you go into the day to spend time with God in prayer, praying to God, giving thanks to God, remembering before him your own needs, bringing before him the needs of others. It's a good thing to have some kind of a prayer list that you work your way through when praying for the needs of others. thinking of people in your family, thinking of people in your spiritual family, your church, thinking of the wider work of the kingdom, whether it's in your own denomination or whether it's in other churches, thinking of missionaries that you support and think about. Lots of things for which to pray. Praying for revival, revival in your own life, revival in the church, praying for the spread of the gospel. Folks, Paul says, follow my example. And one way in which he was an example to us was that he was a man of prayer. Are you a man, a woman of prayer? Do you encourage others through your prayer? Your prayers, for example, at your prayer meeting in the middle of the week or on Sabbath day. Follow my example, says Paul. Paul was a man of prayer. Let us be people of prayer. Have a good day.